Greetings citizens of the world. An alarming Ministry of Foreign Affairs (MOFA) report circulating in the Kremlin today states that within 3 hours of the Ministry of Defense (MOD) issuing their grim report yesterday about the United States' planned invasion of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and as we reported on in our 9th of September report, Venezuela prepares for invasion after U.S. uses hurricane cover to send strategic bombers to Colombia. The Americans demanded an immediate emergency meeting with Russia, and that President Putin agreed to, but with his warning that the Venezuela crisis is yet another spark to the flame being wielded by the Americans that could unleash World War III. According to this report, President Putin authorized this emergency meeting between Russia and the U.S. to take place within 36 hours in Helsinki, Finland, and it will be held between one of Russia's top nuclear weapons experts, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, and his American counterpart Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs Thomas Shannon, who is the United States' top diplomatic expert on Venezuela. With Russia having already warned a fortnight ago that the United States was setting the stage for an invasion of Venezuela, and further stated that the new U.S. sanctions against this South American nation have opened the pathway to war, this report continues. Russia's commitment to this country and its peoples is unstoppable, with Russia, also, having just broken the American blockade of Venezuela this past week by delivering 30,000 tons of wheat flour to feed this country's peoples being deliberately starved to death by these U.S. criminal monsters. To what the United States is doing today in Venezuela, this report explains, is exactly what they did in 1973 when they overthrew the democratically elected government of Chile and murdered its president, and whose barbaric tactics used have been historically documented. Recall the U.S. regime change operation in Chile from 1970 to 1973. Somehow concluding that the Chilean people's election of a self-avowed Marxist as president was a threat to U.S. national security, U.S. officials targeted Chile for a U.S. regime change operation. As part of the regime change plan, the CIA did everything it could to make the Chilean economy scream. What that meant was that the CIA secretly engaged in actions designed to bring maximum economic suffering to the Chilean people, including starvation, as reflected by a scheme by which the CIA secretly bribed the nation's truckers into going on strike, thereby preventing the delivery of food to people all across the country. The idea was that by killing the Chilean people or their children, that would make them more amenable to a military coup, which ultimately came in 1973. As was done by the United States against Chile in 1973, this report says, so too is it being played out again today in Venezuela, and where its entire economy is now screaming too, and as the MOD explained yesterday, is a deliberate action done by the Americans against Venezuela by their chalking off, since 2013, of all U.S. dollars entering there, thus causing a liquidity crisis that has led to hyperinflation. In order to keep its economy stabilized due to its lack of U.S. dollars, this report explains, Venezuela has had to resort to using short-term loans to keep itself functioning. By that nearly 4 weeks ago, the United States placed sanctions against them from being able to do by threatening any nation that would lend them money, and further ordering everyone in the world not to even pay the dividends they owed Venezuela. With Venezuela having payments with interest totaling more than $4 billion due before the end of the year, this report continues, these new United States sanctions make this nation's economy recovery all but impossible now, and whose only achievable goal is to worsen shortages and inflict as much suffering on the Venezuelan people as possible. Not just economic warfare is the United States waging against Venezuela, either, this report details, but political instability too, and as evidenced by fascist right-wing opposition officials now being found with crates of cash smuggled to them by the Americans, and recent evidence uncovered that the CIA is responsible for the assassination murders of hundreds of rural activists. As to why the United States has marked Venezuela for death, this report explains, is due to the nation electing a National Constituent Assembly on 30th of July, and that is described as the utmost form of democracy with esteemed international figures Jimmy Carter, former U.S. President and head of the Carter Institute on Monitoring International Elections, and Noam Chomsky, MIT professor of linguistics and reputed scholar of geopolitics, both declaring that this nation has the most thorough democracy in the Americas, and arguably in the world. Not being understood by the American people about a national constituent assembly, this report says, is that they are able to create one too in order to remake their nation like Venezuela is doing, and who, in fact, held their first one in 1787 where they drafted the still current United States Constitution, but with many now, also, calling for a new one to be convened, called Convention of States, and whose leaders state. Almost everyone knows that our federal government is on a dangerous course. The unsustainable debt combined with crushing regulations on states and business is a recipe for disaster. What is less known is that the founders gave state legislatures the power to act as a final check on abuses of power by Washington, D.C. Article V of the U.S. Constitution authorizes the state legislatures to call a convention for proposing needed amendments to the Constitution. As the mod detailed yesterday, however, this report continues, that the United States considers it a crime for any nation in the world to hold a national constituent assembly, and as they evidenced by stating, the crime for which the United States used to justify their overthrow of the Honduran government was due to its President Manuel Zelaya having sought to hold a non-binding, nationwide poll on whether to include a fourth ballot box in their 2009 elections to usher in a national constituent assembly for the rewriting of the country's constitution, and whose effort was intended to democratize the country's laws that favored the Honduran elite. This report concludes by noting that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is currently meeting with top officials of his nation's close ally Iran, with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani firmly asserting to Maduro, "We have no doubt that the new methods of the U.S. government cannot last for long," a sentiment most surely hoped for by an entire world weary of America's wars and fearing World War III.